Buddhism is about the yin and the yang and how the dark forces is the impetus that drives the light to achieve nirvana, to achieve enlightenment. That the wheels, that it's required to have the two polar opposites to push each other to create the movement that causes the purification. And what is purification if it's not to get rid of the dark part of us? How does it make sense if we purify to the point where you get a gray color, or do you purify to get a clear color? Like, how does that make sense where the darkness is forced, it compels the light to become lighter? Maybe there is a possibility of that, and that does make sense, and it did make sense to me for many years. But now I'm starting to question everything, because when I was young, my grandmother had an altar where she had Buddha statues on it, and it was huge red wood, and on top of that were two red lidded candle kind of lights. They were plug-in lights, but they represented candles, and the light bulb was red. So at night, when all the lights are off, you just see two red glowing lights, and then you see the statues. And when I was young, I remember always being afraid to go to that room. It just was scary looking, and some of the statues, if you look at some of the Buddha statues, they look a bit scary. They are the Buddha of compassion. She is not scary, but the majority of the statues, I'm not sure if they emanate the kind of peace that I would get if they weren't there, let's say. So I know that their teachings are very attractive, and I know that they make sense on certain levels, and it seems really nice to have a Zen feeling, not to believe in a figurine or anything. But behind the Buddhist, before it branched off, is the foundation. And we have to look at the foundation of where Buddhism came from. And it came from this man who was wealthy and realized that all of life is suffering. And so he adopted to accept the idea of trying to get along with your enemies, trying to bring them along in the journey. They are good and bad parasites in our body, and we live with them, cohabit. That is the philosophy in Buddhism that I'm aware of. And there is a spiritual woman, late Dolores. She is a hypnotist, and she was very well known in the New Age community, because she started to look into the deep psyche of human beings in a place where, so all these hypnotists that got degrees and psychologists, they were deterred from looking in this department. And this department of of our psyche in the human mind is very discombobulated and hard to understand, and sometimes downright creepy. So scientists and psychologists, people in the scholars, when they study this, they avoid this area of the mind where it's really deep And she, on the other hand, dwells in that area. And she was able to find that they all started to say the same things. And there were different patients, thousands and thousands of patients that she has documented over, I think it's over 20 years or 30 years of research. And they all came up with the same conclusion when she asked the deepest, darkest part of that psyche that no one is willing to touch. And she's been probing at it for 30 years. So she asked them, what are they seeing in the, in the world? And they all come up with the idea that the world is splitting into two worlds. And one survives and is in ecstasy and jumping up and down. The people on the earth is hurraying, hurrah, and it's a happy place. And the other world that splits off, it goes into world war and destruction and people dying, and eventually the world of that world dies. So there's a split off, and she consistently sees that throughout her entire research. And what if this is like what the Bible says, you separate the wheat from the shaft. And when the world is going through its purification, so are we. And the part of us that don't want to move on and don't want to become light beings, don't want to evolve, they get to choose to stay, and they get to choose to go down the route that goes into death, because whatever that is not of life, is not of the light of the world, the life of the world. And when there's no light and there's no life, there's no light, there's no life. If there's no sun, there's no life. Maybe there is, but it's not like what we've experienced. It's not the kind of life that we've experienced. So if Jesus is the Son of God and the only Son of God, the one and only Son of God, the only thing that is closest to that, and they said that Jesus is the light of the world. The light of the world is our sun, that is the only sun we have on this earth, and that sun is the light of the world. So if we were to take Jesus as if he was the sun, the closest thing to Jesus physically that everyone can see is the sun. And if we look at the attributes of the sun is life-giving, the sun is warmth, and the sun is brilliant, and animals respect the sun. And in a world without the sun is in a world without light, without salvation, without Jesus, without grace, without pardoning, and I think that would be a cold place. And if we look at the previous tribes in the human development, when do we have altars is when we have sacrifices made. So the fact that Buddhists have altars and statues, and then I know that my grandmother used to put maybe pork, some vegetables, or some rice, and some some fruits for the gods, and she always thought that that would help bring peace into the house. And that was just something that she learned from her culture. But if we look at an altar, it looks quite scary. It doesn't feel right. And it just reminds me of sacrificial altars. So cleaning up our lives is like cleaning that up and questioning what is it that we're believing in. Just because we heard that this was good, did we ever look into this? Did we ever ask the question? Did we ask Creator himself, the creator of all that's good? Because the Creator is a good God. And if we didn't ask the question, how would we know the truth? Because in asking, we shall receive. And if we never ask, like the 2-3 monks that I recently questioned, they never asked the question despite being disciplined to meditate and achieve a certain level of radiance within themselves.